There's a lot of questions about the Gnosis and Genshin impact. In Gnosticism, the monad is the supreme god that emanates divine beings. One of these beings, Sophia, creates the demiurge, who is the creator god. Gnostics believed that the god of the Old Testament to be the demiurge. The term Gnosis specifically meant divine knowledge. The demiurge would trap souls into the material world until they regained divine knowledge, or a Gnosis. To Gnostics, divinity and knowledge were one and the same. Gnosis is where we get the word agnostic for people who are not religious, but also diagnosis, prognosis, ignorance, with gnosis meaning knowledge or the lack of. If an Archon gained a Gnosis, they would gain divinity, but the Gnosis were handed out by the heavenly principles, and only after Nibelung brought forbidden knowledge to Teyvet. The dragons were there before the heavenly principles, with the heavenly principles overthrowing the sovereignty of the dragons. Following the theology of Gnostics, the dragons are the supreme god, and the heavenly principles are the demiurge. This fits because the dragons originated everything, but the heavenly principles shaped Teyvet. So the dragons are the supreme god, and the heavenly principles is the creator god. The Gnostics believed that the god of the Old Testament to be the demiurge, and that everyone who followed them were ignorant. Now this kind of just sounds like early Christians trying to explain why they were better than Jews. But for the sake of Genshin lore, the people of the Seven are the ones worshipping the demiurge, the false god, while the demiurge is intentionally keeping them from their divinity. But in Genshin, Gnosis are real, tangible objects made by the demiurge. So if the demiurge is intentionally keeping the people of Teyvet's divinity from them, and there are objects called Gnosis, it's not too much of a stretch to theorize that Gnosis are the divinity taken from the humans of Teyvet. Now, this isn't a perfect theory, mainly because we know what Gnosis are made of and why they can be the master of the elements. They were made from the body of the third descender, with descenders being able to have natural control over the elements. Now, I've already theorized that Nibelung is the third descender, but for my theory on how Gnosis operate, doesn't actually matter who the third descender was, as all descenders seem to have the common trait of control over the elements. Venti describes visions as primitive versions of Gnosis. Visions are granted by Celestia, but their power comes from the Archons. Neuvillette, when he regains his full sovereignty, willingly sets aside part of his power for visions as well. Gnosis, on the other hand, are not essential for Archons to wield the elements, but do greatly empower them and links them to Celestia. My theory is that Gnosis are powered by humans and are directly impeding them from realizing their divinity. My theory comes from how we see a number of Gnosis being used. The Hydro-Gnosis powers the Oratrice Mécanique d'Analyse Cardinale. This works by gauging the audience's opinions on the state of a trial. Focalors had to build the Oratrice to gather enough power to execute herself and overcome the throne of the Hydro Archon. The Pyro-Gnosis allows the sacred flame to burn during the war between Natlan and the Abyss. The sacred flame is fueled by contending fire, which only appears when Natlanese go to battle. The Dendro-Gnosis powers the Akasha, which in turn gets its power by linking all the minds of those who wear an Akasha terminal. The Akasha combines the knowledge of all those in Sumeru, taking away their ability to dream, and as a result, the Akasha is the source of great knowledge. A was never able to get the Electro-Gnosis to power anything, but Scaramouche and Dottore were able to use it to power their artificial god, and was designed to be the new god of wisdom. When Hypatia witnessed the memories of Scaramouche, he began to consider her his first worshipper. This suggests that the Electro-Gnosis was acting like the Dendro-Gnosis, linking minds to the power of a god of wisdom. Speaking of Dottore and Scaramouche, I believe that the real reason for the Vision Hunter Cree was actually a massive experiment by Dottore to see what would happen if a nation went without their visions. The result was that the will of every vision user coalesced and aided the traveler in the defeat of their subjugator. The Geonosis doesn't power anything in particular, but it was used to create all the world's Mora. Due to Morax being the god of contracts, and Mora intended to represent the contracts between all individual humans, it's possible that if the Geonosis was collecting humanity's divinity, that this was how it went about doing so. For the Anemo-Gnosis, Venti didn't really use it for anything in particular, but it is suggested he can hear the hopes and wishes of those that are carried on the wind. This way, the wind is a medium of sorts for people's wishes. If there is a link between a specific element and humans' innate divinity, then that's one way for the Anemo-Gnosis to be used. Also important to note that Neuvillette can feel the emotions of people through water. The link between humans and sovereigns/archons isn't what's unnatural. What's unnatural is the Gnosis, deliberately made and handed out by the heavenly principles. The Gnosis are a way for them to co-opt the natural element system of Teyvet. The heavenly principles didn't even need the Gnosis to begin with. They only used them when Nibelung brought forbidden knowledge to Teyvet. This is very interesting, because Nibelung couldn't use the natural forces of Teyvet to overcome the heavenly principles. He had to go off-world to get it, and if my theory that's what made him the third descender is correct, it means only descenders have that power. Also, it's forbidden knowledge. Forbidden knowledge, i.e. what the original meaning of Gnosis was. Gnosis equals knowledge. Gnosis in terms of the Gnostics equaled divine knowledge. Forbidden knowledge is abyssal. It's possible to use the abyss to mimic elemental powers. In Genshin, Irminsul holds the sum of all knowledge in Teyvet. The roots of Irminsul are the ley lines. Memories and knowledge flow through the ley lines. The flow of elements is what makes up the ley lines, i.e. elements equal knowledge. If gaining divine knowledge is all humans need to reclaim their divinity, then does that mean that once upon a time, humans could use the elements without a vision? Kukulkan did say that in a time that would have been before the Archon War, humans could barely control elemental forces and were then tossed into Teyvet. It means humans could control some elements. Now whether this worked like visions, or just something like those potioneers do, I don't know. But Kukulkan himself was the one to teach humans to harness phlogiston, which makes it plausible that they could control the elements without visions or the abyss. But if humans don't actually need permission of the gods to harness elements, it makes me wonder if visions were also part of the plan to co-opt humanity's divinity. Visions are the eyes of Celestia, possibly what the gods used to spy on humanity. Ineffa's Silver Nod Cry vision and lunar-related powers certainly hint towards what's going on. My guess is visions granted by the Seven under the rule of Celestia are gold, due to the elements as we see them now originating from the heavenly principles' use of phlogiston. But Fatui and Nod Cry visions are silver to represent coming from the moon. Freena's vision was granted by a sovereign. I don't know what this says about sovereigns, but Freena's vision seems to be a mix between both silver and gold. But what's more interesting is that on the character screens, no matter if they have a vision or not, the casing is always silver. Piero did question this relationship between the gods and humans via the visions. If the gods could watch humans, why not stare back? In fact, he does stare back. The Fatui also makes delusions, which are made from dead gods, not unlike how the Gnosis was made of a dead descender. Perhaps in the same way the divine nails transform forbidden knowledge into something that's still corrosive, but tolerable to Teyvet, the process of using a delusion means using a power that's still corrosive, but not as damaging as using the abyss. Hard to say, and for now, very much rough speculation. My final thoughts on this is that technically the Traveler is collecting the powers of the humans they meet. Almost all in-game mechanics in Genshin have story-related presence, such as the character's frequent acknowledgement of domains, or the mystery behind the waypoints. Suspicious characters like Paimon and Catherine reference the waypoints, but the other characters never use them, or be a major plot hole in many of the problems facing the people of Teyvet, such as people trying to escape Inazuma or the characters trapped in the chasm. Sometimes I get the impression that the entire concept and storyline of Genshin Impact was written for the sole purpose of wanting to make a fantasy RPG game, writing the lore to fit the mechanics of that RPG game, rather than making the game mechanics to fit the lore of Genshin. For example, The Witcher didn't start out as someone wanting to make a fantasy RPG and writing a story for that. It started out as a short story and it became so popular that they made a game of it, which also went on to become extremely popular. I feel the writers of Genshin are choosing to write a story that marries the lore and the game mechanics as closely as possible. The name Genshin refers to the ascension of the character, or the leveling up that would happen anyway. Alchemy and Mora are real-world forces in Teyvet, mirroring how people spend in-game currency to get new artifacts. The Gnostic Hymn, which is just a tactic to encourage players to log in as often as possible during a patch and to spend money, is the most obvious and dangle in front of your nose piece of lore mystery in the entire game. However, the most interesting Genshin Impact mechanic to me was the ability to switch between characters, which me, playing a gacha game for the first time, found very unique. Usually you play as one character, or if you do play as more than one, it's in a team. I only encountered the switching character mechanic when I played LEGO Star Wars, and that was only when I was playing a level for the second time. If all game mechanics in Genshin are related to lore, what's the lore behind the traveler turning into other people and no one questioning it? On the character menu, it's hinted that other characters are simply traveling with us. But this isn't a universal canon. How on earth could all these busy characters find time to adventure with us otherwise? I'm not trying to claim Genshin writers have an in-universe explanation for every piece of lore, or claim that the connection between lore and game mechanics always maintain narrative consistency. But if there's a link between the game mechanics of collecting characters and using their ability, and the fact that both the Heavenly Principles and the Traveler may have the ability to collect people's divinity, that connection is a pretty mind-blowing piece of lore.